welcome again, guys. It's the Init6 team with you. We've got another special guest with us today. It's a man who kind of blazing a trail, really, for network automation amongst network engineers. Jason Edelman from Network to Code. Jason, do you want to give us a quick intro about who you are and how you got here?
Sure. I'll keep it short. We can dive in over the next half hour or so. But yeah, my background is, I'm a network engineer at heart that spent a career doing traditional networking, working for Cisco and manufacturers, integrators, and so forth, and made the transition into network programmability and automation several years ago. And right now, that is my day to day.
Yeah, and you've made a real career of it, right? With the business and whatever else, and we'll hopefully talk about that a little bit more later. But I'm intrigued. I mean, as I said to you on the preamble, we're a bunch of gnarly old network engineers, probably not that dissimilar background from yourself. How did it all start? I mean, you were a CCIE, right? In root and switch, or go on, fill us in.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, it's a good question. So again, I would say I spent my career initially in networking, and I had in high school, right? I did have 2 years of light programming in high school. So some concepts I had seen again as a young lad, if you may. And then, fast forward for a good 13, 14 years, I was just, neck deep in networking. And for me, it probably started, you said this recently too, but in like 2010 or 11, I started reading about OpenFlow and SDN and the whole movement that really, started to transform networking for what we hadn't seen in a long time. And so I spent probably a couple of years, blogging, as an outlet to kind of just, see what could happen in the industry. And, in that time frame, I got access to, again, some of the Ansible stuff, Puppet stuff, and Cisco OnePK I've alluded to in the past, their first SDK. And that was probably the first time I really sat back to think, like, do I actually want to, do any automation or coding or development? And in my former job, I was a solutions architect that was, again, day to day, doing route switch, wireless security. And then at some point, these things were coming up a little bit. It wasn't a lot. This is 2000, now at this point, 2013 to 14. And, but having access to some of these tools, given our partnerships with manufacturers, it was, the question to me was very pointed. Do you want to do this? And then I actually sat back in my chair and asked myself, like, do I really want to dive in and be more hands-on than I've been in 15 years? Go ahead.
I was going to say, so no, it's interesting you said about OnePK, because I remember that being a thing. And from my point of view, I mean, what was I doing then? I'd have been just moving really into more of a design role, just becoming that sort of pre-sales solution architect, I guess. Guys, shut up about what you were up to, but OnePK for me was a bit like, what is this, and why is this a thing, and is it really going to make a big difference? You must have seen something in it, I guess.
Yeah, look, at the time, many folks would say, OnePK wasn't great or it was a failure because it is no longer around. But for me, like, OnePK was, it was, as advertised, it was an SDK to communicate to networking devices. And at the time, a lot of analogies, like an iPhone SDK or an Android SDK to write apps, it was like this was meant to be an SDK to write code against a networking device. And I'll never forget this, that, over the past the prior years, from like 2013 and the previous years, whenever anybody would mention sort of like scripting and coding against networking devices, I would always try to Google and find things out there to try to see what is it. Honestly, I couldn't even understand like what that actually meant, and Google would return literally almost nothing. So now in front of me was this SDK that you had Java, bindings for C and Python, where you can choose your language, choose your platform. And again, it was probably too fast for Cisco around having, too much multi-platform support, multi-language support. But again, I clearly chose a language and chose a platform to test on. And so that was really the kind of my foray into the intersection of programming and networking. And again, it wasn't easy for me going back then. I can kind of talk about, how I went to learn, but that was for me so attractive to say, you can literally write code. I could see this in action and start to program against a device. And this was all in parallel to the SDN movement. And so it was eye-opening to see that we had architectures that were emerging, but also now different operational models, because you can actually start to be a bit more efficient, a bit more predictable with how networks could be managed going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, I suppose SDN and the whole controller-based platform sort of approach is one way, and then you have this kind of SDK kind of programmability approach, which is a different thing, right? Because you're interacting directly with devices, albeit through a programmable interface. And I suppose you see what's possible with one, and then go, well, yeah, but what about all the old stuff? How do I do stuff on the legacy, if you like? And so I guess that's where that came in and got interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why I think it's very easy to just talk about the new stuff and the modern stuff and the SDN stuff. And I mean this more back in like 2014, 15. But the truth is, and again, similar roles for some of the folks on the line, but in customer facing roles, 90% of it is what we may call legacy, right? It's just the nature. It's just the nature of, there's large organizations out there or small shops that, might have 5 to 7 year life cycles of devices. And so while I think we often get caught up in a lot of the media and attention to new products, and rightfully so, for planning for the future, for when things are going to be turned over. But there's a team of network engineers that are managing networks today, and so I think there's still that gap to say, like, these skills, like these broad set of skills, could be said that it's going to help with the traditional and the legacy network. But again, in my day-to-day now, these skills are relevant across managing SDN controllers through their APIs, clouds through their APIs, at the same time, standalone devices through now their APIs as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the one thing that always comes back to me is this idea of infrastructure as code, and I guess that's something that you guys espouse quite a lot, right? And I guess and here's me not sort of being a little bit cautious, maybe, and being a bit old school, but I struggle to understand how that might apply to those very great sort of brownfield environments you just talked about, right? The real networks where you've got a data center environment over here, and you've got a WAN here, and you've got your access network there. How do you approach that? I mean, I like I say, this is all bigger to me than anything I'm used to. So
no, it's a good question, and there's many ways to slice and dice it, or skin the cat. But at the same time, like there's I think like the personal journey that we all go on to learn new tools, and if you look at infrastructure as code, like that bubble, there's things like version control and maybe some enhanced Linux skills, and maybe there's some CI platforms if it's like Jenkins or Travis, and then maybe a config management tool like Salt or Ansible or Puppet to define it. And then eventually, then the question is, well, could we truly manage our whole network as code? And again, maybe Terraform nowadays in cloud. So, I think it really, to go down that path, meaning to be, issuing a pull request and have it get merged, kick off a job, it is a very advanced and progressive concept still for networking. Been around, as we know, been around a bit more, or for probably a decade more in the traditional app dev space and the traditional DevOps space. So, I think on the networking context, there's pockets of it happening, and I think it's probably, from what we see, it's more of some of the, I would say, smaller to mid shops that could move quicker, that could have a full pipeline. Meaning when we talk about large enterprises, or if we're talking about 10, 20, 30, 40,000 devices, there's going to be the intersection of operational models, and I guess I'd refer to it as the DevOps operational model, infrastructure as code, versus a more traditional enterprise model that ITIL processes and so forth. And maybe they do want to use a ServiceNow portal, a BMC remedy portal for requesting a change, getting it approved. So again, for what we see at Network to Code every day is kind of like the intersection of these two things, meaning if there's a portal like ServiceNow being used, it could be very rigid and strict to get the right inputs. Approval process could happen there. When approved, it can trigger a job, and that job could be to something like Rundeck or Ansible, or it could be a variety. It could even be to Cisco NSO. It could be a variety. It could be to a variety of platforms. But to get the right configurations in there, it's treated, version controlled properly, and to get the right parameters and playbooks and cookbooks and runbooks and however you want to refer to these things as, to get them versioned properly, to get peer review. And so it's like a good intersection where, it might not be sort of merge deploy, it might be merge ready to deploy in a repo to have your things like your golden configuration templates, right? Maybe versioned in a repo, but like the inputs, could in theory come from ServiceNow. So I would say when we look at it across an enterprise space, that's probably a bit more common, but based on size and scale and whatnot, that'll probably dictate, I guess, how much down the path folks go as infrastructure as code versus looking at, I would say, a realistic blend between commercial tools, ITSM portals, and turnkey solutions, open source tools. So again, we've never really seen, it's not either or. It's really kind of like the intersection of a lot of these platforms and paradigms working together.
So really what we're talking about is an ecosystem, right? And not just of the tools, but also of the processes, and the fact that all of these things have to work together to produce this new way of operating networks, I guess, is what we're saying. And I get so is that where you guys come in then? So obviously I've been around Network to Code a little for a long time. I joined the Slack, as part of the sort of community efforts. So obviously, there's a lot of guys and girls on there talking constantly. It's probably one of the most useful sources of information from a community point of view from network automation. You've kind of built something there and built out from it, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, look, I think there's the community, and if you want to say even like the Slack workspace and the Slack community, it's interesting when I look at sort of the past 10 years from blogs to Slack to other vehicles to communicate outbound. It's great to look back at it, because I know for me personally, some of those things started and were created because I truly wanted an outlet to communicate with like-minded individuals. And next thing I found out, and then we found out now, is just like there's thousands and thousands of people that are thinking the same thing. And admittedly, I'm still lurking a bit on Slack, but the day job now is quite busy. But yeah, there's over, I think, close to 15,000 people on the Network to Code Slack, and so it's quite amazing to see everyone from newbies just learning what YAML is or what JSON is and how Python can be used. And again, a lot of manufacturers and vendors have dedicated channels in there for their products. But at the same time, yeah, it's just been a great thing to see over the years, and so it's still great to see, because it's still proof almost that there's so much evolution to have still on the operational model of networking. And if I, again, quite succinctly, it's really just network management. It's network management and automation. And how do we scale better as people and network engineers, so that way you can manage more nodes, or you can manage them more reliably. And so there's it's again great to see the growth overall.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that interests me right now. I mean, obviously loads of different tooling to learn, loads of different capabilities, especially now with DevNet and their certification process and whatever, joining the party. But I don't know if it's just me getting old or what, but I'm sort of very much sort of thinking about, right, well, how do we get businesses to really focus on giving us the opportunities to do network automation? I mean, we're all learning how to do this stuff as engineers, because that's what we do, right? We spend our own time doing it. We spend our own resource. We build labs to do stuff or whatever. But now it's getting to a stage where we really, this stuff, you guys are proof of that, I suppose, that it's coming to be in production. It's coming to real life management and operations. How do we go about that? How do we? I mean, you guys are talking to businesses all the time about this stuff. So how do we convince people that it's a good idea?
Yeah, no, again, another good question. And there's no silver bullet, only because I think everyone's personality is different, and a lot of organizations have different cultures internally. We've seen some large organizations that are very data driven. They can literally go into the ticket queue and say that they need to know that there's 5,000 or 10,000 change requests, or maybe incidents, and 30% of those were because password changes, or whatever it might be. If we kind of they need the data to say, look, if we're gonna invest in here, let's actually start to build out the data to calculate an ROI. And so I think there's the data driven folks. We've seen this quite a bit. There's also we have some clients with senior leaders that they know that they literally have large networking organizations across architecture, engineering, and operations. They just know that there's zero automation today, or let's just say there's maybe 5 or 10% with pockets of things that are happening. They know there's zero, so they know if they invest that there's going to be a return, because it's just going to be used to start to scale. And then there's organizations that don't want to listen just yet, and just because everyone's already working long weeks, and this is gonna make things harder initially before they get better, like anything else. And so that's key. So we've seen, I would say, more on a personal level, when we look at network engineers and this sort of increased skill set, we've definitely seen some people that, unfortunately, or however you want to look at it, it's the same thing for studying for CCIEs and certifications. You have to put in personal time to be able to even give your boss a demo of what could be. Because if you're doing it on company time, it's like, oh, you should be, getting ready for that cutover coming up. And so, there's pockets of it that start like that. And once the demo is seen, then it could be, a lot of, hey, we need more of that. Keep doing that, or Bill, Jack or Jane, hey, that was an amazing job. Keep it up. And so, there's probably a blend of cultures. And so, there's the data-driven folks. There's folks that have to understand the use cases a bit more. And again, definitely quite a bit around that. They just know automation has to be used because it's talked about so much, and they do know that everything is manual today.
Yeah, I think that's always an interesting one for me. Is really thinking of it, I suppose, as just improvements in the way that you do your network operations, and but then it's understanding, well, how does that show benefit? And I mean, the thing you hear of the ideas of self-service, or the ideas of increasing speed of agility and that sort of stuff, speed to deploy and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I think the networks that we've got are more complex, and somehow we need to be able to manage that complexity. And of course, Wolfram, go on, you were going to.
Let me ask a question about that. There is this initial invest. Sometimes when you talk to upper management, they say, oh, you're going to automate in the network. We are expecting savings from day one on, and then you have to explain them. No, there is some time where we have to invest actually more until we later then can reap the savings. What's the best way to explain that, and what is a time frame that you give to them to explain?
Yeah, no, look, it's a good questions, and I wish the answer was just like very straightforward to give. I definitely think in general, when we look at tooling and process change that's going to be required to do the deployments, and I would say we've done a lot in this space with both commercial tools and open source tools, and there's if one of those is chosen, no matter what, like there's going to be work to install it, to get it configured, to have it do certain things. If it's you might have to build workflows out, build dashboards, get the view how you want to see it. So there's work to be done, and I would say it's a good question on how much time should senior leadership expect to wait before results are shown. This goes back to, and I talk about like our overall strategy, even what we do day to day. So like as we have, knowing it takes time and approaching it strategically, we'll always try to attack quick wins as fast as possible, but at the same time, build the proper holistic strategy out as well. So that way, the worst part about it is if we were to say, hey, we need 9 months to show value, and then by month 6 or 7, leadership's budget's getting cut, and we got to cut the project. So, I would say strategically, it's nice to be able to have quick wins, and a quick win could be making it easier for, someone in the service desk to bounce a port, or to track down where an IP or Mac is in an environment, right? These are things that certain tools can do out of the box, certain things that, can just be done in short order without necessarily worrying about the ecosystem of tools that might be needed for a full solution. So definitely attack it, I would say, with quick wins is always valuable to show some value in the first couple of weeks. Again, right now, quick wins, like we're doing a lot with chatbots. And so we'll have demos to show our clients around chatbots to find an IP address or to get data out of NMS systems, just to present it in a more meaningful manner. That way you don't have to give access to the system or to the tool to everybody. So I would answer it as, showing value in the first 4 to 6 weeks is nice per team. But realistically, I would say when we look at enterprise size environments, to have the network be automated, if we're talking about the DMZ, the LAN, the WAN, SD-WAN, data center, like all these environments, it literally could be years to have this thing fully automated from, if we want to have change requests, from self-service portals, to have pre and post checks be automated, to do automated diffs, and to be able to, do automatic changes and OS upgrades, and like the full life cycle to be able to do out of the box rack and stack CTP, get an IP address, onboard it to all the NMS systems, and then manage. Like really, it probably is man years to get that fully operable. Now for us, I think value in the first few weeks, and then I would say 6 months you can have like reasonable results, enough to decide if it makes sense to continue on this journey in mid-sized to large organizations.
It's a journey, right? And we always talk about the journey from us as individuals, but it's bigger and wider than that. And that's something I guess that you guys work with companies on building, right? And taking them from the start through to wherever that may be. I guess it's an ongoing relationship, something that never really comes to an end, is it?
Oh, for us as a business?
Generally, I think, but yeah.
Oh yeah. Look, I think for business that would be great. If the relationships keep going. But yes, I would say from our standpoint, some of our clients might have highly skilled teams, and they bring us in to go faster. For a period of it could be months to years. Other folks, bring us in to define strategy. Other folks bring us in to do, all of the above, define strategy, get them off the ground for a year, and then we'll kind of wean our way out. So it really depends. And so again, it depends on the size of the organization, how many people they have dedicated to the initiatives, but yeah, there's no one size fits all. But I would say from our standpoint, as we get in there to define strategy, build and deploy, then we would do less hands-on and then more oversight and guidance, as they take on more of the hands-on. Yeah.
The bulk of the people watching this and the people we speak to are network engineers who are going through this process of learning.
Yeah.
And of course, their jobs are going to essentially change, I suppose, over time. When and this isn't going to be, we're not going to be automated out of jobs tomorrow or anything like that. None of that nonsense. But I'm thinking of people that you would have on your team, for example. What sort of backgrounds would those guys have, and how far on in that change and that shift would you be interested in seeing people come to you? Because I'm thinking of it as a career trajectory,
right?
Understanding where we come from and where we go to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I would say from our standpoint, we've definitely hired a very diverse set of individuals. But as we talk about it, there are, we do see things evolving in the industry, and some of the titles we'll refer to, and internally with our clients, we have the network engineer today, and I'll just say engineer, but it could be network operator, network engineer, network architect. We definitely think in general, the traditional network engineer makes sense to have, I would say, light skills with Linux and Git, YAML, JSON, things like that, just to be able to take that next step. It doesn't necessarily have to be deep into code, but it's going to be it's just natural to be able to understand high level concepts. I'd say from there, I would say is probably the bigger journey for network automation engineering. And network automation engineering, we view as more of a net DevOps person, or even I would say more broadly than that, is a tools person. And very common in the DevOps space, meaning you literally might know zero code, but you know how the tools work together. Again, commercial and open source, meaning you're okay to log into a Cisco tool to do network management orchestration. You can log into Ansible or Jenkins or GitHub, so you understand the communication between these systems, and you can use them, I would say, as a network automation engineer. But when things need to be extended, and a lot of platforms today, again, commercial and open source, are extendable. So if you buy a tool, sometimes there's the ability to add a little bit of code to extend it, and that could actually be a different role or title. And one option is network automation developer, because still with the networking term in there, they can add extensions. When that team needs help, then you kind of get into the software engineering, maybe the people who are going to build tools and build libraries and so forth. Right now, as an industry, we kind of lump those three on the right, meaning network automation engineer and developer, software engineer. We kind of refer to them sometimes as just network automation engineering. And I do think in the next couple of years there'll be a finer line to say that the vast majority of network engineers, I do think in general, are going to understand, YAML, JSON. They can maybe use Postman, right, to understand how to communicate with web-based APIs. But there'll be a finer distinction between what they should do and then when they should engage, I would say, the developers and the software engineers. So as we hire across that spectrum, it really is across the board. I would say we've hired over the years many network engineers who only had a few months of development experience, but what they did, is they showed the aptitude and the desire. And so I think it's key. It's key for us. Honestly, I think I probably see more network engineers today that just have so much passion to want to learn this, and so they can learn the development. Then we have also hired software developers that learn a little more networking, and again, honestly, they have the fundamentals from day one. they don't even have to learn networking at times because again, a lot of our team are networking, networking folks or former networking folks. So just inherently paired together, they do well. So I would say, we really don't have one way of hiring. I would say it's more about, I would say, the culture and the aptitude of the person that we really want to, and the desire that we really want to find.
I guess the reason I was asking is
Yeah.
really around, again, the certification process, right? So again, the reason we started doing this was because we knew things were going to change, and we wanted to help people along the path. And then, of course, Cisco introduced the DevNet certifications and refreshed the traditional certifications to include elements of automation. So you've got that kind of traditional networker, 80% with 20% of automation in those certifications, and then the DevNet certs, which are almost the opposite of that, the kind of 80% development and 20% of networking. And it's interesting the way you just described the roles there, because that kind of fits with what you're saying. Is you've got people at one end of the spectrum coming this way, you've got another people at the other end coming the other way, and I think a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is because of the introduction of these new certs, that and the drive behind them, which for good or bad, I think most people will say for good. You've got that much more focus on the sort of 80% development, 20% networking kind of approach at the moment, just because that's where the push is coming from people like Cisco. So, I mean, DevNet has driven massive change, right? As far as as far as we can see. I mean, you guys must see it as well.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal for the industry. It's ironic, right now I mentioned OnePK earlier on, 2014. Like a lot of that team, sort of transitioned into what became DevNet. That was the same year Network to Code started. So 2014 was a big year, Network to Code and DevNet, for two names. But I think I remember being at Cisco Live actually in 2000, I think it was 15. So I think it might have been the second year of the DevNet zone. And yeah, it was great. Honestly, it's been great. I think since then I've been to Cisco Live a couple times, and the DevNet zone continues to grow. And it's helped us tremendously because like the messaging in general, early on, I get questions around, what we're doing as a business and talk about network automation, programmability, APIs. People want to know how that matches and is used within SDN environments. And have to whiteboard and diagram that. Again, it doesn't matter if you have, let's say info blocks or platforms, and there's APIs, we can fetch data out of them and use that data to feed into a tool to configure a device, let's say, or to dynamically collect data from devices. So I think the DevNet community, the Cisco channel, the Cisco sales organization, really, we're talking about, probably with all those three in aggregate, probably hundreds and thousands of people that really it helps. Like that's our message. Like even now with, say if you've heard of DevNet, then like as a business, like we take those technologies and skills and help our clients deploy them day to day. So, it's a great thing for the industry. And yeah, it's been great. I took the first exam, the DevNet Associate. Great to see a lot of the content was actually vendor neutral even. And so kudos to Cisco on that. So pretty awesome job. Yeah.
So how did you do on the DevNet Associate? I've not done it yet. So.
Yeah, I would recommend it. It's good to see. Yeah, look, I went into it, pretty cold, and I came out on top. So, good. which is good. Yeah, no, but it was good. Good to see. And even now, as we hire, it's there's always a dynamic, right? In social, talking about certs and the value of them. But the truth is, it does give some barometer, right? From CCNA to CCIE to DevNet Associate to professional. It's the barometer is subjective, but it shows initiative. It shows folks want to continue learning, and there's a lot of benefits for it across the board.
Yeah, No, I mean, we it's one of the things that we all always say is that, you know, you, once you've got one cert, all that ever really shows you is how much you don't know. And so you're on to the next
Totally.
one and on to the next one and on to the next one, right? So,
Yeah.
especially the IE, I think it's just one of those things. If you've gone that far and done that much, you're stuck on a lifelong learning track, and that's it.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't trade it for the world getting a CCIE. I'm so glad I got it when I did, you know, when I was younger and maybe had a little more time. And so there's still a lot of talk about the value of it. For one, I wouldn't not want to have it, not want to, you know, have you know, pass that exam. And you know, we're gonna do
up to date, yeah.
I haven't. So do I have
right,
it?
okay.
You know,
Oops, sorry.
yeah.
We'll cut that
So
bit.
no,
It's fine.
no, I blame it. I don't blame myself. I really don't know. I actually renewed it. I think like 4 times, and I stand by this. And every 2 years, I'd get the email. You got to recert by this time. I really don't think I got the email for the 56th time, and so I didn't get. Otherwise I would have definitely. And,
I'll let you off. It's 3 years now, of course, as well, which is nice. But
yeah.
No, and all the other certs count towards the recert now with the sort of continuing education, which is how I recerted last time. So I don't see myself doing any more labs anytime soon. So
right, DevNet lab maybe DevNet lab.
Maybe I think Derek, who's not on the call, has got his mindset on being the first one to get that. So we've got a bet on with him, but we'll see how that one progresses.
Okay. I'd like to throw something in here if I can.
Go for it. Yeah.
So we've talked some about, you know, how you try and get people on the business side to allow you to stick your toe in the water for some of the automation things, but also sometimes, and you know, I work for a small Cisco partner, but you also need to try and engage some of the customer engineers, network engineers there to try and get them, you know, some of it is the, oh my goodness, this is going to take my job. But the other part is something where you can show them some kind of quick win so that they say, oh, I can see what this is doing. It's not going to take my job and I can learn to do this. It doesn't frighten me. So you've got 2 different things where you want to get those quick wins. One is for the business side, but then the people that are going to be the target audience for this are probably going to be more the network engineering part. So where should people start on something like that? Because they may be even able to help push their own companies towards doing some of this stuff if they can demonstrate some quick wins.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, over the past 6 years, I've done a lot of teaching and instruction in this space, and a lot of presentations and things like that. And so I'll say every network engineer, business leader too, but definitely on the network engineering side, everyone always has a different aha moment in terms of like seeing the value if they're not getting it. I was like, you know, mine, I feel like I got lucky. I had it early in terms of seeing some early on demos of Ansible just generate config files. So it was literally, you can have an inventory file and have a bunch of hosts in there, you know, develop, you know, inventory of some commands and then auto generate 10 of them, 20 of them, 30 of them. So it wasn't about like the speed and quantity, but it was about the reliability. You know, I think back about all of the times, you know, you hit, you know, Control F or, you know, find replace in text files. And so even that wasn't about speed, but it was like, oh man, I actually fat fingered that syslog server, but across 30 files, and now you got to go back and edit a bunch of them. So, you know, I think that's been a common starting point. But in general, like this is the part that, you know, conversations help. And, you know, I hear all the time that, you know, there aren't use cases for automation in certain environments. The truth is, I do think, you know, in, you know, a 20, 30-minute conversation with network engineers, when you start asking about like the day-to-day and how they spend their time. And so, you know, if we look at either project work or some of the operational tasks, like there's going to be things that happen quite often. And so, well, I think there's the things that happen quite quite often, meaning daily or weekly, or there's the things that are maybe quarterly, but when they're even quarterly, it could literally take days to put together a report or to gather the right data. And so we've definitely seen a lot of the quick wins be read-only. That way, there's not as much fear of making change on the network. And everything from collecting data and automatically populating a report that they can share with leadership, or to verify if there's going to be a turn up of a new site or a new device, to certify that things are working. So there's a number of them for sure, but usually in short conversations we can kind of start to hone in on their day to day, meaning if they're a firewall person or data center network engineer, or just or jack of all trades. The same thing is true for even the SDN environments. If it's DNA Center, ACI, SD-WAN, all these environments, is there's still reasons you're logging into the UI every day. So if you're logging in to create a VPC in ACI every day, then trying to automate that, and for one, I would say saving time, but it's about the repeatability. And so aha moments are different, and otherwise, we definitely get. I was also caught up by talking about the value add of going on PTO and not getting bothered. And if we can take what's in the collective brain of a team and have it codified, again, I still think that's scary for some folks, thinking that if it's in code, then they're not needed for it. But somebody built it. It's it's still in their head. But ultimately, I think the use cases vary from read-only stuff, automated diagnostics and troubleshooting. How you would troubleshoot, and like these are the things that we'll ask our clients is too. Like if you were to hire a peer on your team, how do you train them, or how do you get up to speed on the network, especially firewall policies? How do you troubleshoot common issues? And if they're in a document, that's like the first step to then undertake it. So hopefully does that answer a little bit?
I mean that documentation thing straight away, right? Even that's problematic, isn't it? It's that thing of actually keeping documents up to date. Let's have that automated. And I think this is part of the problem is that I'm not sure people think, when they think automation, they think of change and they think of making changes and whatever, but it's so much broader than that, right? The capabilities that you're talking about here are things where somebody has to sit down and do the same thing over and over again in order to get some useful information or whatever it is. And I think there's so many opportunities that people don't even consider. I mean,
verification
and the other day. About compliance audits and things like this. Where you'll take a week, once a year, you'll take a whole week to go and pull all this information together and do this stuff. Why not just have that information always there, always collected, and then you don't have to worry about it. So I think you're exactly right there. It is a different thing for everybody. Everyone has something.
I was just thinking of, and then this would be like early 2000s, and either, I don't know if you would call this repeatability, but I'd almost call it like consistency and avoiding of errors, because I can remember even early 2000s doing work for customers, and somebody's converting from one model router to another router, and the configs, you want them to be the same, but there's some different IPs per site. And rather than typing all these things and being a crusty old Unix person myself, I know some people would do this stuff in Excel, but for me, I'd do it in like awk and sed and shell and things like that. But feed it a pipe separated files of the IPs and the site names and something, and then apply a replace against the template config, so then you can drop it as you're sitting here prepping 50 routers to ship out the door. Or one of the other ones that I can recall doing multiple times, people are like, oh, my network is static. Well, no, you change providers, and we've got to move this, so we've got provider A, and now we're one at a time peeling these off and moving these sites to provider B, things like that. So I mean, I've seen things like that way back, even when it was so brutal and low tech, that I don't think anybody would necessarily call it automation, but I guess that's what you would call it.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, it's a good use case to think about, like the replacing of hardware. That's why I talk about use cases. We've seen a variety, a bit, one that fits in that is, M&A, or you've seen some large organizations acquire other organizations, so they want to apply new standards to current, to new hardware. But at the same time, if there's a refresh of a device, it's great for network automation context, because then, what you've described is really kind of decoupling, we'll say decoupling the data from like the CLI commands and syntax, so that way you can review the data and approve the data without getting bogged down of like the right syntax to say, hey, these are the right IPs, these are the right VLANs, the right host name. And then nowadays that might get rendered in a Jinja template or, some template of some sort. And so, I think it's again, another concept that's still very common these days, just to kind of understand like the process of data, sources of truth, the intent of what should be just from a data perspective, and that would then get used via some platform to first deploy it, and then have, again, it can be another platform, another tool, part of a solution to develop a closed loop system. That way you could verify the intent on what it should be.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I guess, and coming all the way back round again, I guess all of this means that we don't need network guys anymore, right? That we're done, right? So long as we build the thing and set it off. No, it's not at all, is it? I mean, this is the key, right? Is that what we need is people to have the networking skills, but also the understanding of the automation approaches, right? So
yeah, exactly.
This isn't going anywhere, is it? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, look, in the short term, there's going to be more opportunities for more opportunities to shift roles, do more, take on more work. But I don't think in the very short term, network engineers are going anywhere. But I think the opportunity for those that want to maybe enhance their skills, or I was saying even enhance, but maybe broaden their skills. The opportunity is there because network experts are still needed to design the networks, architect them. And at the same time, like there's going to be a closer and closer intersection between these skills. I've said this in the past, the truth is, if things continue to go this way, I would say 5 to 7 years, there probably are fewer pure network engineers that know zero development than these hybrid folks that we're talking about on this call.
Yeah, I think the way, I think the way I look at it is that what you're now looking at is developing a design for a solution rather than just a network and just the bits that are strung together to make things work. Because and it's probably something we should always have been doing is designing the operations and the process that wrap around the networks that we build. And I think the point is that now that's become so intertwined because of these network automation capabilities we're talking about. Really, that's what we're doing, isn't it? What we're doing is designing the operational process and the way we actually maintain and manage the environments that we're building.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember in 2000, I think 12, 13, 14, Big Switch, had a slogan that like Telnet SSH was the biggest transition in network operations in 20 years, and I'll still joke about it every once in a while, but it's true. Like there was never any change for 20, 25 years around process and how we interface with the router or switch. And next thing you know, in the past 8 to 10 years, we've seen controllers, we've seen DevOps tools, programming languages, we've seen new commercial tools that have greater capabilities, streaming telemetry, all of these things. And so now, like the tooling's changing, and in parallel, process is changing, skills are changing. And that's why, for one, it's again, I love a great time to be doing networking. But yeah, operational models are key to make sure like the right tools and the right processes are chosen for the right team and organization too.
Yeah, I think for me, it's as much about the way the business wants the IT to look because it's about turning around really now and getting to a point where businesses just want IT to function and to do its thing and to change when it needs to be changed, to be fast if it's broken and get it fixed. You know, it's much more about business processes so dependent on the IT, I suppose, that IT is not bringing anything new to the table in terms of a way business functions, but it's speeding everything up if it can be done in as efficient a way possible. And what better way to make it more efficient than to automate, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I would say it's a blend. I would agree, but there could be opportunities to offer the business more, based on, technology and APIs and automation, maybe due to them. There could even be more services offerings to the business, internal clients, external clients. So there's probably, some of that even to offer. A lot of clients have B2B connections and, manual processes and, could be, new to the business, not to deliver faster, but it could even be self-service for their clients to get visibility. So yeah, opportunities are there for sure for competitive edge. Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Well,
guys, we got any more thoughts?
Well, actually, I was just thinking as we were talking through this, one way to potentially get people to jump on board with this is think about, like, what's something that you have to do on a repetitive basis that's not a lot of fun, that's tedious and potentially error prone, and think about, what other more cool things could you be doing if you weren't spending your time doing some of these tedious, repetitive, error-prone things and could focus on something that would be more fun and more productive. So.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I would say the other part is, again, having taught a lot of classes in this space, people tend to do labs and training as an example, and they'll learn a little bit. But the most important thing is to find a problem or a repetitive task that they work on daily, because they actually know that better than something else that they would get assigned. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even from a manager or a peer, you got to, think back, hey, I'm always doing this. And the way they approach that problem is going to be way more thought out than if it's given to them as a task. So having the folks that, again, want to do it and can think through some of their problems that they don't like doing, and it was definitely the right way forward.
That's cool. Well, listen, we'll wrap it up there. Jason, really appreciate your time today, mate. It's been really interesting discussion, and I'm sure there's lots more to come from that. As we get feedback, we'll let you know. But thank you for your time, much appreciated, and hopefully speak to you again.
Oh, thank you guys, really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, man.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.